Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to the show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host. So today I'm joined with Emmanuel Daniel. How you doing today, Emmanuel?
Hey, Kirk, good to see you, and I'm doing fine.
Good, good. We're glad to have you in the show. Wanted to bring you in the show because I liked your bio, and there's a lot of things that you do that are aligned with some of the future trends that are going on. So maybe before we begin, maybe you could tell listeners a little bit about your background so they can get to know you as well as I do.
Well, I grew up in Southeast Asia, and then I finished university in Singapore, and I have a second degree from the UK. I trained to be a lawyer. I wanted so much to become a lawyer, and then when I did qualify to be a lawyer, I decided that's exactly what I didn't want to be. Spent 10 years of my life, working in consulting companies, and that gave me a front seat view of lots of corporate finance type developments in Southeast Asia, and so on. And then an idea struck me that I wasn't good working for anybody, so I started a publication platform called The Asian Banker from out of Singapore, and used that as an excuse to go out to all the other Asian countries. And initially there was about 18 of them, and learn about how the economy works. And the best way, there are two good ways to learn about the economy. First, follow the governments, and second, follow the banking industry. Governments weren't a good thing in those early days in the 1990s, because Asian governments tend to be a little thin-skinned and sensitive about how they're viewed. So and don't pay the bills. And so I chose banking, and the reason is banking. To me, the way I describe banking is it's a cathedral industry. Led in any country, from cradle to grave, everyone's got something to do with banking. And so that gave me an idea of how banks are run. I eventually became probably one of the most connected people with leaders of banks across the Asia Pacific. Eventually, extended the business to the Middle East and Africa and so on. And we also run programs in Silicon Valley. And the funny thing is, because I was called the Asian banker, I made very good friends with some very interesting people in the US system. So Dick Kovacevich, who was effectively the founder of Wells Fargo as we know it today by cobbling together various banks, is a very dear friend. And the book that I'd written 2 years ago now, the foreword was written by people like Barney Frank, who co-authored the Dodd-Frank Act and so on. But the height of my corporate life was actually to get a front seat view of the rise of China. So I started an office in Beijing in the year 2000, and in 2001, China signed on to the WTO, and saw an unprecedented set of unprecedented growth for up to about 2014. And I was taking it in. And then sometimes I'm in Washington, D.C., having lunch with a senator and a lobbyist. And they'd say something like, in 2003, we can afford the Iraq war. It's $1 billion a month. But we are concerned about China's ability to handle its bad debt situation. And then you fast forward, look back from today, you realize that China just kept growing, and the country that had the banking crisis was the US. So then that sort of triggers in me a desire to understand the mechanics of how these things work. Really, I mean, what happens when policymakers meet, who influences who, and so on and stuff like that. So I'm probably one of the few people who have an insider view of both the policy making in the US as well as in large countries like China, and of course from Singapore, where I come from. So that's the that's the lay of the land, as it were, of my story.
Okay, great. So tell me, I mean, I'm always fascinated with China. So you obviously opened an office over there back in 2001, and that was, a lot has happened since then. What's your take on China? Like, we basically set up China as a place to sell our goods, and then things changed, and now they're becoming a dominant global power. So maybe kind of walk us through your experience, what you've seen in China, where they were, kind of what's happened, and take that to kind of where we are now.
Yeah. Long story short, Deng Xiaoping was the leader that took the country from the depths of the Cultural Revolution, 1976. I mean, you couldn't wish the Cultural Revolution on any country in the planet, which had stripped the country of its culture, its social bearings, its fiber of society, and all that. And then out of that, out of those debts, he raised the country. And in the early years, he had a cohort of economists, a very interesting group of economists who applied their minds to try and figure out how to create a market economy. And then at just about that same time, 1976 to 1986, the conventional wisdom globally was the Big Bang approach, which is the UK approach of the state selling all its assets and liberalizing the economy and letting the private sector determine stuff and all that. Russia took on that approach, didn't work. They created oligarchs who then came back to haunt the state, lots of corruption and all that. So China took something of a dual step approach, and then worked towards being admitted into the WTO. And China had friends like Singapore, which had a foot in the US and the foot in China, who a country like Singapore, which actually understood both the US and China, who brought them together and said, let them into the WTO. I mean, the US actually went through a lot of thinking whether they should or not. I mean, whether you should or not. And then in the end, by allowing China to get into the WTO, it saw unprecedented growth. But a lot of that growth was from the southern side of China, it was the industries, the manufacturing in the south of China that benefited considerably from the opening up of trade to the rest of the world. By the time 2004 or so, then you saw investment banks like Goldman Sachs talking about we need to concentrate or focus on large countries. China and India are the future because they are huge. They've got large domestic economies and so on. And they were looking for winners. And then they came across companies like Alibaba, nurtured them. I still remember the day when Goldman Sachs put $10 million only into Alibaba as a proof of concept, and then grew that, led it to listing in the US. And that's one string of the story. What the state did very well in China was that from the end of the Cultural Revolution, it invested incredibly in education, healthcare, infrastructure, social infrastructure as well, to the extent that it could. So it just laid the groundwork of building an educated workforce, and eventually far surpassed even countries like India, which today has a huge underclass and who are even illiterate, whereas China literacy is like 97%, something like that. And so that prepared them to benefit from this globalization trend. And then the economy matured, and right through the 2000s and into the 2010s, you saw the rise of the platform players. And the funny thing about the Chinese platform players is they weren't a starter in the early 2000s when you had already seen companies like Google and so on coming on stream, Yahoo, and then 2006 or 7, Facebook comes on stream, but the original version of Facebook was desktop. But by the time the Chinese players entered the platform world, it was 2010. And by that time, the iPhone had been invented, the mobile device had become more intelligent, and it had about 3 years gestation period to mature. And the Chinese players were native to it. And that's why you saw incredible growth and success on the platform economy, on the mobile platform economy of China. In fact, Facebook floundered and had to buy I think Lina Khan, the FTC chairman, was saying that that it was illegal for Facebook to buy WhatsApp and Instagram because these were mobile native, while Facebook wasn't making the transition very well. So there's that conversation going on in the US at the moment. But you see this race where every change in technology, it didn't really matter which country the player came from. The ones which were more native to the transformations taking place took the bait and took the baton and ran with it. And so right now we're at another inflection point, which is AI, and we're seeing how these players are playing. And a whole new set of factors come into play. Now, by the time you reach 2014, and what's interesting about China, the state, was that between 2001, from the time it became a member of the WTO, to about 2014, the state was willing to play second fiddle to the private sector, and especially to the tech vendors who were being funded by the US stock market. At the height of its funding, the capitalization of Alibaba was $830 billion. And China as a country benefited from that. So that, I call it the cascading effect, that 830 billion comes back to Zhejiang province, to Hangzhou, which is the home of Alibaba. And that has a cascading effect of creating another 10, 100 unicorns and 1,000 sub-unicorns and so on. So, it became a very nurturing ecosystem. And eventually the state got its act together. And one of the reasons why the private sector platforms were able to do what they were doing initially was because there were no laws on data protection. There were no laws on consumer protection. There were no national laws on banking, and what I was seeing was peer-to-peer lending players being protected by their provincial governments and getting into trouble, and the regulators in Beijing were not able to to get their hands on them. There was a period in 2014-15. I used to see the rules published on the regulator's website, but it was unenforceable. So it was about 2018 that the state finally got its act together. 2014 was when Xi Jinping came into power, and he wanted to see a stronger state. And when the state came into power, it started to restrict many things that the private sector was doing. It outlawed private tuition online, which was also a listed company, listed in the US, and suddenly it just lost 80% of its valuation, because the state says that there shouldn't be an uneven advantage for poor kids not to have access to good education, and the kids who can afford it be able to pay for it and stuff like that. And so they are going on and on and on about many of these socially unacceptable behavior, which now they are in a position to regulate a lot stronger, because the state is now competent, and even for AI players, the State Security Council actually sends officers into these offices in the part of Tsinghua University where all the AI players are, to check on the algorithms, to make sure that they are not doing anything that's socially unacceptable and so on. So I think where we are right now is that the rise of the competent state, and how far are they able to take that agenda? That is where we are, and that's where we, that we are. I'm taking a watching brief. I'm not entirely critical, but I have one big question, which is, will the state be able to afford to fund all of its, objectives, when in the past there were three sources of funding? It was state infrastructure, there was subsidies, and there was foreign capital. And now the foreign capital is sort of evaporated almost, and so the state thinks that it can, help its local companies to continue to be competitive. And when I look at the numbers, if you take the top 10 players in AI in the US, they are funded to about, I think it's about $10 trillion. And I think that's about the size of the Chinese capital market in its entirety. So just looking at the funding size, the U.S. actually right now has a lead over China. And how this will play out. Now, having said that, the social objectives are also very important. I mean, when a Chinese looks at the U.S., he sees homelessness, he sees broken down infrastructure, he sees the state being unable to fund a lot of the social initiatives, high healthcare costs. Within the U.S., you're able to sort of let it take its course, sort of. China cannot afford to allow that to happen because it will immediately result in social upheavals and so on. I mean, it's a very sensitive country that was united only after nearly 40 years of provincial warfare from about 1912 when the Qing dynasty fell to 1949 when finally the communist government was able to hold the country together. And that agenda, and they've had not one but two Tiananmen Square incidents. So sometimes when I talk to my Chinese friends and say Tiananmen Square incident, they say, which one? The one where Zhou Enlai died and there was a riot in Tiananmen, or the second one in 1989. So it's a pretty combustible society, and I think that the best way to view China is not to take immediate instances in as a point of reference, but to look at it on a longer timeline. It will eventually have to deal with personal freedoms and liberties, personal liberties, and so on, because the population is getting educated. A lot of the population now have traveled and they know the rest of the world. I still remember when the World Cup soccer was on, China was still playing around with COVID lockdowns, and then when they looked into the television set, the rest of the world was like in Qatar, watching the World Cup soccer. So you can't keep some of these out, and then in some of the house apartments where my employees live and friends live, they just refuse to pay attention to whatever the local government was telling them to do in terms of lockdown and stuff like that. So it's a pretty dynamic situation. We appreciate what they need to achieve. We ask the right questions in terms of how they're going to fund their future if they have fallen out of favor out of the global capital markets. And then take stock of each of these developments as they come. So you have EV, you have 5G. The interesting thing about 5G is that the headlines say, "Oh, China has overtaken the US in 5G." Actually, the first country to be totally 5G wired was South Korea, but China was close behind. And then a year later or something, maybe a year and a half later, I was coming across speeches given by ex-ministers saying that, okay, we've built the 5G networks, but the 5G base stations cost 3 times more than the 4G base stations, and we don't have applications for them. So the telcos can't make money out of it. So did we move too fast? Stuff like that. So there are winners and losers in the areas that the state has given subsidies and try to speed up developments. EV, we can discuss that as well, but yes, it grew on the back of subsidies, but that's also one way of redefining the global market. I mean, China has hands down caught all the traditional car manufacturers flat-footed. And yes, it is subsidizing that rollout. Janet Yellen came to Beijing, already now like 2 or 3 times, and she talked about the subsidies. And to me, I'd say, enjoy the subsidies. I think it was Milton Friedman who said, like, if somebody gives you a subsidy, say thank you. And then take it, and then to follow where they're taking it. So that, in a nutshell, is China to me.
Nice. So, appreciate the backstory. That's very helpful. Now, you mentioned earlier that banking is a cathedral industry, and you also mentioned that you follow banking in a lot of these countries. Can you talk a little bit about that, why that's the case, and also, how you see the future of banking? I mean, you obviously have a lot of new technology coming between AI and crypto and blockchain, and a lot of that's going to be impacting banking for better or worse, depending on what you think of banking. So, what's kind of your opinion of where banking is now, and where do you think it's going in the future, if anywhere?
So the one thing about banking that I put my finger on, and it's the title of my book, which is The Personalization of Finance is Here, is that the technology now exists for all of us to do our financial remittances, our financial transactions without a bank. The technology is here already. And both regulators, as well as the banking industry, as well as the disruptors who are trying to knock the banks off their pedestal, are trying to, to shape how this evolves. So with that at the back of our mind, we need to ask, what do banks actually do? Which is they are intermediaries. So the core of banking that is that has an existentialist question to answer is, at which point will the business of financial intermediation either evaporate or be transformed into something else? So that's the big picture. But having said that, in a lot of countries around the world, basic banking facilities, giving credit to people who don't have credit to be able to generate wealth, is still an important agenda. And the future of banking can come 10, 20 years from now. In the US, you have a traditional banking system that is trying to protect its turf for as long as it possibly can. And a lot of the initiatives that have come to experiment with new ways of doing the intermediation business, for example, peer-to-peer lending platforms, that came, and then it sort of didn't work, which is, both borrower and lender meet on a platform provided by a third party. The third party doesn't carry a balance sheet and just matches the borrower and lender. It sounds very simple, but it didn't really take off, especially in the US, because it came back to the source of funding and the cost of funding. And the banking system still has, in the US, the banking system still has the lowest cost of funding, bar any of the new players coming on stream. And the new players can only play in the high risk market, where the interest rates are higher, the cost of credit is higher, and try to penetrate those markets and create an ecosystem from there, and then come back into the banking industry. So there's a lot of activity in trying to disrupt the banking industry. The incumbents still have their field, but today we see the rise of what's known as digital banks, which are banks without a history, without a legacy. And that's important because when we think about traditional banks, we're thinking about banks with a huge amount of technology sitting inside the organization, and thousands of line coders building applications, repairing them, updating them, and so on. And today, a digital bank is one that comes with none of that legacy, goes straight into new technology, has fewer people to get up and running. And because they are focused on the front-end application, the customer experience, they're able to garner incredible amounts of liabilities or deposits. And that's where the battle really is, because whoever is able to garner the most liabilities at the lowest cost will be able to navigate and create all kinds of financial products and so on. And the other thing is that the traditional banks are also bogged down by things like capital requirement, regulatory restrictions, and so on. And the regulators in the US, just like in China, are beginning to understand how the disruptors work, and they are spreading their tentacles around to make sure that these are regulated as well. So there are lots of technical things happening in the industry at every level and every slice, every juncture. But that in general is what's happening in banking. And then comes the question as to what kind of banking institutions do investors reward. And the nice thing about the US is that investors are very demanding about productivity, about cost of business, and profitability. And I've seen very interestingly, there are very badly run city level commercial banks, community banks, if you will, which can't even match their assets and their liability in a small town that they operate in. At the same time, there are regional banks which have got their act together. They have momentum, and then they go out and buy other regional banks and become larger. And the larger they become, the lower the cost of their business, and the market rewards them. So the U.S. Banking scenario is actually diverse in that the market is rewarding a few well-run institutions with a momentum on their cost of funding side, and punishing the ones that cannot keep up. Now, I want to say something about the convergence of traditional banking and the new technologies that are coming on stream. And I'm not sure what your audience is like thinking about crypto, for example. There are people who just absolutely worship crypto, and there are people who think that it's devil's creation or something like that. But what's happening now is that with Silicon Valley Bank, we saw how when banks digitize their deposit business, how quickly it can react to market circumstances, and rumors. Peter Thiel puts out a tweet, and the next day, $10 billion disappears, and by the end of the week, $40 billion disappears, and the bank is technically insolvent. And traditional banks are not used to that because, firstly, a lot of the deposits used to be physical. There, you needed to walk into the branch and queue up if there's a bank run, and in the 3 days it takes for you to get to the front of the queue, the bank has some time to react. But today, you do it on a Sunday afternoon from the comfort of your house. Now, cryptocurrency is 24/7, and banks, by the way, have the luxury of shutting down their system at the end of every day because the huge technology that they have behind them, requires their mainframes to be batch processed at the end of the day. So there's like 1 or 2 hours at the end of the day where you can't do your banking. Whereas crypto is 24/7, it creates its own liquidity, it's unleveraged, and it's got functionalities on the crypto. And what I see happening is that banks are beginning to start to need to function like crypto in order to be relevant and in order to make sense of the technology that's coming their way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I find it fascinating with cryptocurrency, with the rise in the U.S. of private lending, and there's a lot of these trends are filling the gap that the banks have traditionally been poor at doing. Well, recently poor at doing. I mean, prior to 2008, things were different. But I find it interesting, and I wonder, in some sense, like, what's going to be the use of a traditional bank anymore? I mean, you've got the mortgages that they're doing, which they're basically just selling off anyway. I just had a local branch here of a big name bank close, and I was talking to the manager because I had an account there. I was talking to the manager. He's like, "This is our most profitable branch," and they closed it. He's like, "I have no idea why," and so, I look at a lot of this stuff and say, all right, the trend is really interesting. To me, it seems like banks are going the way of the dinosaur, because you have crypto where you can instantly move money, in seconds across the world. I don't need a bank to take 3 days and then take $100 from me, and I got to file forms and do all this stuff to move money. I don't need that. I could just send it via, whatever, some sort of cryptocurrency. And so banks have tremendous power and money and influence. So I don't think they're going to go away quickly or easily. Look at the media. I mean, the media has been losing money for decades, and they're in the death throes of their industry. But there's, all they're doing is they're creating problems for people to watch the media, but they're not improving society. They're making it worse. So I wonder if banking goes that direction, if we end up just being technologically connected with all this stuff in a better way, right? Even mortgages. I mean, you have to have somebody do that, but it doesn't have to be a bank. It could be someone else, right? You could have. I mean, I guess some states you can. I know in Massachusetts there's a lot of regulations. Some states maybe not. But anyway, so I'm just curious, and I'm curious how cryptocurrency in general is going to evolve over the next 5 years, because at this point, now that the ETFs have been allowed to go live, they pretty much legitimized Ethereum and Bitcoin. In the public's eyes. Now, and many people say it was legitimate before, but the public in mass is now legitimized through ETFs. So how do you see that evolving in the US? And I know Asia is certainly one part, but I'm curious in the US how you see that evolving.
So the thing about crypto as a investable asset, that's one story, but crypto as a medium of transaction is a totally different story. And the medium of transaction has nothing to do with the valuation of crypto. So I always say this, I said, the magic of Bitcoin wasn't that it went up to $65,000, $75,000. The magic of Bitcoin is that any one of us can create our own crypto. And float it out and get our friends and family to accept it, and your counterparties to respect the value that you're giving that, and that's exactly what Sam Bankman-Fried did. He gave it a value of $180, and there was a huge community of investors who were willing to accept that as a valuation. I mean, it's just one of those things, right? Now, so the crypto as a technology as a medium of transaction is actually being borrowed by banks today. So globally, what's happening is the Bank for International Settlements is encouraging countries to further tokenize their deposit business. So if you take Silicon Valley Bank, which had digitized its deposit business, and digitized means that you're actually calling into the bank on your mobile phone or your laptop and going into your general ledger and doing a transfer, right? And the transfer is all math and it's all accounting. But when they tokenize it, you're actually moving actual assets to someone else, and once you take it out, you can do whatever you want. It's like cash. So the movement globally is to try and tokenize the deposit business. Now, the US, Janet Yellen, who I've met before when she was, Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco, she's a big fan of central bank digital currencies, right? Which is the bank's version of a stable coin. A bank's version of a crypto, okay, which is let me say that again, okay. Like she was a fan. Janet Yellen and I would say some people in the Treasury Department are all fans of the idea of a central bank digital currency, which is the state's version of a crypto. So the state issues it and then circulates that, which immediately creates the problem in that if the state, meaning the Federal Reserve Bank, issues central bank digital currency, then why do you need banks? And so they had to re-engineer the relevance of the banking system if they had a central bank digital currency. But we are now where we are, which is in the US, legislation is going through now, where Congress is effectively telling the central bank that no, you cannot issue a retail CBDC. Then the options available to the Federal Reserve Bank and also to the Treasury is to encourage banks to tokenize their own deposits. So in other words, every bank becomes an issuer of its own stable coin. Okay, so I think that's eventually, and this is 8 to 15-year process that I think that we will see unfurling, even as the US has made a conscious decision not to go into central bank digital currencies, and then the other options start opening up.
Do you really think it'll take that long? I mean, 15 years. I mean, a lot's going to happen in the crypto market in the next 2 years, nonetheless. 15, like 15 is too late. Like people are already using Bitcoin, and I think won't that be too late?
So what I say in my book is the U.S. always moves in times of crisis. It's always a crisis that triggers innovation in finance. I mean, right to the core. And I can go back in history from the formation of the U.S. to funding the Civil War to starting up the Federal Reserve banking system in 1912 because of a crisis in 1907 when they had rejected the idea of a central bank all through the history of the U.S. And then, getting off the gold standard in 1971. So every one of these transition points, inflection points were because of periods of crisis. And so, like someone said, I think it was, I forget who the writer is, but, how do you become bankrupt? You slowly and then suddenly. So you get into trouble for a long time and then you make the decision suddenly. So I think that the US is, will drag its feet for as long as it possibly can. And the inflection point may well be if there is a need to internationalize U.S. debt, and continue to make it attractive to foreign investors by digitizing the U.S. dollar. So I think that time will come. And so will it be 7 or 15 years? It will be slowly and then suddenly. So, that inflection point is what we're looking for.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I think it tends to be. I think you're correct. That tends to be how we operate in this country. All right. So another question I had is, when we think about trends, we've got some really big trends going on. We've got AI, we've got crypto, we've got, lots of different things going on. What do you think the future looks like with a lot of these technological trends? I mean, they're moving faster than we can adapt to them. But what is that, in your opinion? What do you think that's going to look like?
I put my finger on a very simple phenomenon, and that is the rise of the individual. The individual is being empowered in a way that was unimaginable through history. The mobile phone is one, but the amount of data that's given to us, and even AI is a productivity tool, which gives us insights that we couldn't decipher if we read 100 books in 10 years. And here you have access to all the knowledge that's out there and so on. And so I think that's what technology is doing to society. And then you radiate it out and you see that institutions have to respond to the greater personalization of finance, as that's where I started, but also of society as a whole. And this is a phenomenon that will affect both the US and China. So it's not, it's bipartisan, geopolitically. The Chinese are also going through this phase where the young generation are being empowered with more knowledge and more insights and more access than they ever were before. And so are young people in the US. And so you get subtext communities that can exist today that in the past were not possible. In fact, in Beijing, I've attended a rock concert, heavy metal concert in Beijing, and for a while I thought that there's no way that you'll find 10 heavy metal fan club members. But because of the internet, I went to a concert where Bern there were about easily 2,000 to 3,000 people. And so government, the state has to figure out how to manage that, how to control that if they want to, and even how to steer it in the case of China. But so I think this is the fundamental transformational power that technology is having on all of us. And I see it in all of the other countries that I go to. Deep in Africa, wealthy wealth is being created. People are becoming incredibly wealthy just because they are being empowered with information with which they can sell, buy, trade, start a business, and all of that. So I think that's where I'll put my finger on. That's what I'll put my finger on.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So, in terms of, I always think of, the U.S. is trying to outsource a lot of our labor internationally so we can get cheaper cost of labor. We have for a while, globalization, all that. That reversed with COVID, but didn't totally reverse. It really just kind of spread out a little bit more, which made the supply chain a little bit less fragile by sending it all to China. But we have a natural second to that, which maybe should have been the first, but ended up being the second, was India. You have a huge population in India, a lot of really smart people, really undeveloped parts of the country, uneducated, unbanked. And so I wonder, what trends are you seeing in India? Because it's always been this country that's fascinating. It's just this untapped resource of people. And some people told me it has a lot to do with red tape over there, but I'm curious in your thoughts, like, as there's a few countries over there that have a lot of potential, but India is one of them. And I don't know, people just don't talk about it, but I feel like they should be. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, India has been a promising country for the longest time, right? And then it's had many false starts. India is what China would have been if China did not have a cultural revolution. And when I say that, the people who know something about the Cultural Revolution will say that's a very cruel thing to say. And here you have a country where people are still, layered in caste systems, and each of the communities have their own cultural habits. They have protocols in terms of how you can marry within your caste, within your status, stuff like that. And then you also have a state that started by being competent from the days of the British Raj, when India was Calcutta was the capital of the East India Company. You go to Calcutta today, you see a lot of magnificent buildings that were built in the 1800s. And from Calcutta, the British Empire ruled all of the rest of East Asia. And so they inherited that competency, but then over a period of time, that competency became corrupt, became dilapidated and dysfunctional. And that's where India is with the state. And one of the things I pay attention to, by the way, is the number of Olympic gold medal winners from all of the different countries. It is impossible that a country of 1.4 billion people cannot produce 2 or 3 gold medalists. When you have a country like Jamaica with just 2 million people, putting out a number of, gold medalists and so on. So, and then you ask, why is that the case? They've been working on their Olympic gold medal, the Olympic tally for some time now. And I try to follow that closely, not just with India, but also with every other country, Singapore, China, and I'm very familiar with the way in which the sportsmen are nurtured in China. China started by making it a state enterprise where the state selects kids from poor villages and then hard grooms them over their childhood to become Olympic gold medal winners. But this year's Olympic, you start seeing a whole new generation of Chinese medal winners who were enjoying what they were doing, and they were doing it because they were having fun. And after they get their goal, they just wanted to go out and do something else. And a whole new generation has come through in China, and India has not even started. And just by studying the Olympics preparatory phase in India, you get an idea of where the country is in its preparedness to be global. The single most important factor that I put my finger on in about India, the state has to be transformed. And there it's quite complicated because you have the central government and then you've got the state governments. Some state governments are far more competitive than others, and they even operate almost like Singapore, which is they've got competent ministers and so on. But the central government is not able to hold the whole story together. But they are making some small progresses. It's China that makes India a better country. 10, 15 years ago, something like this, like the early 2010s, I've stood in front of the bund in Shanghai, looking out to Pudong, where you see all those high-rise buildings with an Indian. And he looks at it and he says, and he in total disbelief, he says, "We have this in India too." Well, I go to Mumbai. No, you don't have it, But at that point, the Indian attitude towards China was one of disbelief, and rationalizing that whatever little they had counted the same. But I think that's changed a lot. There are lots of Indians now who are saying that, we don't have what we say we have. We really need to get our act together and so on. So, without a cultural revolution, how does a complex country find its way? Actually, the US is the best inspiring example. You've had civil wars and you've had, blatant racism that, went right into the 20th century and kept 1/3 the population out of the mainstream and all that. And yet, from within that cauldron, you'll have a community that will build a better state, and a better nation. So I wouldn't rule India out. But the path it takes is very different from the way in which China has progressed. And the Indian diaspora helps a lot because I think that it's when they go abroad and then they come back that they are able to apply a lot of the things that they learn back into the country. But it's a long road. It's not beyond India to take 2 steps backwards even now, and then take 3 steps forward. And that's how it's been since the time they started opening up in the 1980s.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think we have, maybe it's more visible, but I feel like we have more Indian CEOs and head of tech companies right now in the US than we ever have, or at least as far as I can tell. Like I said, they're more visible because they're some of the larger ones. But yeah, it's just fascinating to me. I mean, the opportunity set there to work with India, and I know they've made a lot of good changes, and that's great. And I think they got a lot more to go, but they've certainly done some good work. So as we kind of wrap it up here, what are some final thoughts you can leave us with, or some trends that maybe people should be watching for, in the next 5, even 10 years?
Yeah. Before I get into that, one last point about India is this. I come from Southeast Asia, where the Indian diaspora and the Chinese diaspora meet. I have Chinese in my family, and then Chinese have Indians in their family. We work together in corporations. In my own company, I have all kinds of different communities. But the Chinese Indian, the collaboration or the possibility for collaboration is amazing. In as much as the Indians are very good at software, the Chinese are very good at hardware. And when we bring these 2 things together, you get Singapore, which is a country made up of people. I mean, it has got a majority Chinese population, but it's got a very strong Indian core as well, and of course the native Malay people and so on. So I think that that's one secret that I wish the world will discover, and that Indians and Chinese will discover, and try to work out the strengths of each other. But that's not going to happen today because of the geopolitical tensions between these two countries, and I'm sometimes quite worried about which way it will turn. Last thoughts about what we need to think about technology. Of course, everyone is wrapped their minds around AI. I think that there is too much discussion on the fears around AI rather than to get on with the benefits that it brings and to swim with it. And I think that we need to keep our focus on the productivity gains of AI. The US, I've been following the loss of labor in the US and the loss of power in the labor movement in the US since 1995. That's about the time when you had people like Jack Welch, threatening the unions that, if you don't give me if you don't succumb to my wage demands, I'm going to send the jobs to India and China. That's where it started, and it's a battle that is not completed yet. And I think there's a lot of work being done for the state to protect the worker. But I think going forward, it has to be more of a tripartite process where the worker gives up something, the state gives up something, and the corporations give up something to build a better nation. And I think that if we build it that way, I think that the US, more than any other country in the world, is very likely to find a better, way of, holding the world together than we've ever known. The one thing about the rest of the world is we get to pick and choose what about the, frontier technologies that originate in the US we want to use, and then we keep at bay the things that don't work. But you don't have that privilege. You are, front and center in what's happening. So, I think that if with a bit of, it's not so much going back and creating jobs that existed before. Those jobs are not coming back. The US is never, ever going to be a manufacturing, behemoth anymore. But it's becoming something very different. It's becoming digitized. It's becoming financialized. And so it'll be a different ecosystem and economic system that, the rest of us will be just watching to see what you do with it.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Emmanuel, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us. Where can people find more about you?
My one-stop location, emmanueldaniel.com. And then from there, I've got all the different things that I do: geopolitics, technology, banking, and travel.
Awesome. Well, Emmanuel, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your wisdom. Hopefully I'll have you back on in the future as the trends will inevitably change. So good luck with you, and you got a lot of interesting trends ahead of you.
Cheers. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks for the conversation, and I hope it works well for your audience.
Thank you.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room.
All right, well, that was a great interview with Emmanuel. Really appreciate him coming on the show. Now we're into the panel portion of the show where we have our very own Doug Hegren. Hey, Doug.
Hey, Kirk, how you doing?
Doing great. Well, it's a few days after Labor Day, so we got a short panel. It's just me and Doug. Kind of like the live show, but
and we weren't on last Friday, so it's kind of making it up here. So
yeah, it'll be just as fun. So we'll keep this tight in honor of Labor Day, which we're not honoring because we're working. But anyway, so Doug, what were some of your thoughts on the interview here?
I think for me, some of the thoughts that came to mind is we've been talking about China for a long time. In various not necessarily us, although we have touched on it, but it's been a very interesting global player from an economic standpoint. It's been an interesting investment player for probably going on 20 some years. One of the best places to invest in the early 2000s was emerging markets. A lot of that was driven by China and the growth of China. I know BRIC included a lot of other countries in there, but let's face it, Russia, and he even talked about India and neither did Brazil really move the needle on that. It was China. I mean, we should have just called it the K instead of the BRIC for a long time. But it stood out when he talked about some of the changing policy there. I know as Xi's come in, there's definitely been, you can see in his policies and alignments with Russia more of a movement to try to go back to the traditional methods of China. But cat's out of the bag now. They spent 30, 40, 50, 60 years, going back on the math in my head of how old I am, modernizing and opening their doors to the public, and along with the integration of Hong Kong. They've had a lot of access to public information for a long time. I started thinking in the back of my head, it's like if they really want to reverse that, they're gonna have to become North Korea, because there's just too, as he said, there's too many people have gone that access that information. They're already aware, and once they're aware, there's not much you can do about it. You start looking at access to other technology outside of government control. Things are going to continue to change there, but I do think that it makes an interesting that's really interesting as to whether or not China is going to be a country that's going to be the same level of investment that it used to be. It's if they're trying to reduce and that freedom, that again, we've always knew in the back of our head it's a communist country. Anytime the government could certainly change its rules around its economy, and you've seen some of that, with Alibaba. I was also thinking of some thoughts about India, and just he talked about the caste system, and clearly what's going on with digital, the world of digital banking. I mean those things are, and especially whether it's crypto or just the new technologies that are coming in. There's a rapid change that's been happening in that industry, that world, that industry. We've talked a lot about both the access to it, the number of ways in which you can move currency, what those currencies are. We've talked immensely about the traditional banking system, and even some of these technology banks he's talking about, and the capital gains issues that they're facing right now on investments. And what that might do in exacerbating where technology goes on how we actually, transact for our future goods and services. I thought you raised a great question. He thought 15 years. I can understand, what he's saying about, America moving slow until it has to move fast. But I mean, if we're now talking AI, the singularity, as they say on it, moving up from the late 30s now to the early 30s, and technology, growing, and AI moving as fast as it is, I agree with you. I'm not necessarily sure that it's going to take 15 years because it's blowing up right in our face right now. And if the economy has significant challenges, like I said, that's going to lead to moving slow to move fast, because what's that going to do? Again, if that means that unrealized gains start to become realized, or I'm sorry, unrealized losses start to become realized losses for traditional banks. Once again, people now are trying to access their money. They're restricted. There's problems, bank failures. That could all exacerbate how quickly this technology comes to play.
Yeah, what I find interesting is when I was younger, my dad always used to tell me about trends in culture. And every time I'd see a trend that was kind of extreme and crazy, he would always remind me, is like, the way things work is things are like a pendulum. They go extreme on one end, then they go extreme on the other end, back and forth it goes. And I think we've seen that, right? Like we've seen that, over the last like 20 years or so. You had one side politically, you had one side, people were heavily in favor of one side, and then recently they've been kind of on the extreme on the other side. And then I'd say about 9 months ago, things started to shift back, the other way. And that's just normal. That's just the way things work. And, for better or worse, right? You could argue it's good or bad, depending on what side you're on, but generally speaking, that's just how things work. And you need to understand how things work, because it'll make the rest of the world make sense. So here's a frame that people are talking about, but I don't think people are really integrating this into their thinking, which is the concepts of centralization. Now, we've gone in our country's history from centralization to decentralization back and forth. And we had this big trend towards centralization of technology, right? Is when technology started, the internet was all about decentralizing it. It's about having the internet so that if, a nuclear bomb blew up, then we would still retain all this information. There'd be a place that you could have this stuff. It was protected. It was safe from everything else. And it was great. And it caused the internet to be a decentralized place for people to share. And then technology was created to centralize it. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all these platforms centralized information on one place. And so all the power started getting centralized as well. I mean, look at some of the biggest companies in the world: Meta, Apple, Google, Microsoft. All these companies have aggregated power and, basically the size of their company, right? It's power, money, all that stuff. And so the centralization of that technology has allowed Facebook and Google and YouTube and all these platforms to censor people in the name of free speech or hate speech or whatever they want to call it, right? Well, all you're doing is censoring people. And whether it's right or wrong is not the point of this. But the point is they have control. The centralized control allows them to do that, rightly or wrongly. But the trend has been centralized. But now the new technology of blockchain and cryptocurrency have emerged, which allows decentralization. So it allows people to say, you know what? I don't want to be on your platform anymore. I want to have my own platform. I don't want you to make money off of my profile. I want to get paid for my profile. So all of these concepts of like, look, I could decide I don't want to give Facebook my information because I don't want them to own my data. But where else do I go? Well, there aren't many options, right? And there are some options, but no one's on them. So it's not really an option, right? If I want to communicate with my friends, they're on Facebook or they're on Twitter or wherever they are. So you have to be where people are, right? You can't be by yourself in a corner talking to yourself because you're not going to meet anybody. So the centralization requires everybody to be a part of it, right? The network effect. The more people involved, the more people get involved, and exponentially grows. But now with the technology of decentralization, right? blockchain and crypto allows people to be more decentralized. It allows people to have more control over their persona, their likeness, their, their information, their images, right? You look at all the stuff being done with, with blockchain right now, with games, all of it. It's trending in the direction of decentralization, which is a good thing overall because it allows people to have control over themselves. So if you decide, for instance, let's say your health information. Now, somebody has proposed this, which I thought was an interesting proposal, which is that you you have control over your health information, which we do to most extents, but also we don't, because once you give it to the hospitals, the insurance comes, everybody in there gets it. But if, let's just say, I didn't want anyone to have my health information, well, I would have to pay for access for different things. But let's say I said, you know what, I don't have any money. I'm not, I'm poor. I don't have any money. I don't care about my health information. So I'm going to allow people to profit from my health information. And for that, I'm going to get free medical care. Right? So let's say, for example, because a lot of medicine is done by taking massive amounts of data, aggregating it and looking at it and saying, here's the bell curve. Everybody falls in this bell curve. So this is normal, right? And it's something I just learned today about blood tests. Did you know that if you're taking a blood panel test, that most of I think there's like 3 big labs that people use, really 2 big ones that people use, but that the labs, I haven't confirmed this, but it's my understanding that what the labs will do is they'll aggregate all the numbers and they'll say, this is the normal range. It's not based on what it should be. It's based on what everyone else has. So imagine for a moment that everyone has high blood pressure and you don't. Yours look really low. Let's say yours is quote unquote normal. Well, if it's normal, but it looks low because everyone else is high, well, now you stand out in a bad way. It doesn't mean your stuff's wrong. It just means that compared to everybody else, it's bad. So if everyone else is having too much sugar, they all have diabetes, and you have low blood sugar, they're like, oh my God, you're in trouble. You have low blood sugar. I don't think people realize that this is all based on aggregation. So where I'm going with this is, let's say, I know there's a lot of research being done on gut health and other things, and it's brand new, but they need data. What if you just said, you know what? I'll happily give my blood information or my, gut, my stool samples, whatever's needed to promote more research in gut health. And because of that, I'm going to get free medical care for a month or whatever it is. That's attractive to a lot of people, right? If you think of the idea of decentralization, I have control over my information of what happens to it. And I might decide that I prefer money over privacy. Or I might decide that I prefer privacy over money. That's my choice, which I think is a very kind of US-centric thing to have that freedom. And if you want to squander it, that's up to you. But it doesn't require a big government to do it or a centralized single person to make that decision. So the trend towards decentralization in many ways is good. Certainly we're seeing with cryptocurrencies. The question is whether we trend back towards centralization with a CBDC, which is a central bank digital currency. I know the banks of the world are not happy about the trend. The governments of the world are not happy about the trend. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of a banking crisis, which ends up with, oh, we have a solution. Use CBDC. It'll solve all your problems. It won't. It'll cause more problems, but that I can see something happening down the road that will cause that because people in power don't like losing power. And I my tinfoil hat is too far away for me to grab and put in my head, but I do think that it's something to think about because banking's been around for thousands of years and it's going to stay around even though the use cases are shrinking. And banks have a lot of power and they have a lot of control in government and they have a lot of money. So, and they have control of the money. If you think of the the Federal Reserve has control over our money. So all of that equals eventually it'll be centralized again because otherwise what's the use of having these people in society at all? So I'm not naive enough to think that it's going to go away, but I do think that we are seeing that trend, which is a good thing. And I think if the trend continues, it can lead to a lot of positive developments in society, which end up being a little bit more equitable. Like, for example, somebody had proposed an idea, and I'll give it back to Doug. Somebody proposed this idea about nuclear power plants because nobody wants to live next to nuclear power plants. So where are you going to put one? You can put it in the middle of the desert? Well, it's not near anybody. So what use is that? And the proposal that somebody brought up, I thought was genius. It was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We have this town. We're going to put a nuclear power plant in it. We're going to build a new town. Somebody who's within 1,000 yards of the nuclear power plant, the cost of their house is like $100. If it's like half a mile away, it's like $10,000. If it's a mile away, it's like $100,000. So you basically have the equity, the proximity to the nuclear power plant dictates how expensive your house is going to be initially. Obviously, after that, whatever happens. But it's a way that allows people to make free market decisions in a way that people say, yeah, I'm okay with this because the risk for me is really low. It's only been an issue like twice, and I'm okay with that. And it allows people to make individual decisions about what makes the most sense for them. And so I think the best use of our brain power as a society right now is thinking about how to come up with solutions to sticky problems that we have in more novel ways. Why don't we try this and see if it makes sense? If it doesn't, we'll try something else. But it's a small test in a small area that we just, we all collectively decide this is what's going to happen. I think that's a good way to come up with solutions. Test small, miss small, and then if it works, you start rolling it out to more and more people. The problem with culture and society is a lot of these countries is they take a big problem and they come up with one solution. They roll it out to everybody and say, this is the solution. Like, have you tested it? Like, are you just making this up? Like, and so I think the decentralization will actually make a lot of progress. It may revert back, but I do think that it's a good trend. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, Doug?
Wow. There's a lot involved in that. I think you brought up something that makes my mind wander about our capacity to truly be able to work independently of society. Let's think about cryptocurrency. Like anybody, he said in his thing, anybody can come up with a crypto, their own currency. If let's just say for extremist, if 3 billion people have their own currency, it's useless, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to use your currency. No, I don't know what your currency is. To some degree, when you start getting to that point of complete and utter independence for every person, that is the definition of anarchy. Okay. And if we go back to just biological survivalism, okay, the reasons humans basically evolved into tribes and cities is that, and if you go back primitively to the apes, I mean, they are safer in some sort of a collective. You're always going to have those that have the information, the knowledge, the strength, the abilities, the talents that are going to be different than someone else. And without the collective of those things, you're going to fail. If a ape gets pushed out of the tribe and left on their own, they're going to die. They're going to be killed. Okay. The Greeks tried pure democracy with Athens, and it was a disastrous failure. We see it now. I mean, anybody that watches, social media is given access to billions of voices. A lot of those voices are completely and utterly misinformed and lack intellectual thought. Now, do I think that means we should restrict freedom? No, but I do think that there is a risk of having complete dissolution of any type of centralization at all or hierarchy, because again, it's that collective of being able to work together that does create, success and survival. And to some degree, as we talk about the arc of human evolution, you will start to wonder if this becomes the beginning of the end of human survival, because because all of a sudden, you've just got too many, all people working in different degrees. I mean, the founding fathers created the electoral college because they did not believe that the average person had the ability to make that selective vote, and didn't have the information. And people would argue, and a lot on certain sides say we should dissolve the electoral college because the population now has that information. Yes, it does not mean that they have the intellectual capacity or talent to know what to do with it. And it also means that with that information, they can be more easily manipulated. So, this, I'm not saying I know the solution to this. There is a degree of centralization to some aspect that probably needs to be maintained for the reason that I just stated in the beginning. You can't have 3 billion people with 3 different currencies. But at the same time, you look at the controls that are in place, and you look at the you look at that centralization, and you look at, hey, whether you believe this or not, the creature of Jekyll Island, the Federal Reserve coming together and creating this system that that controlled people through currency, that created the fiat system, that made certain groups exceptionally wealthy and exceptionally powerful. Yeah, that's something that needs to be broken down too. When you look at dictatorships and totalitarian regimes, and you look at the suffering of people under that level of control of power, and you start to understand why the ability to get in there and have the people get access to information is incredibly powerful for their own survival. And I mean, you can go 2 ways. Complete anarchy doesn't create survival, but neither does oppressive regimes, right? There's a middle ground there somewhere. Obviously, North Korea does not work as a system for the world. Neither does the Taliban. On the other hand, you can't have everybody just doing their own thing. We have to have certain laws. Otherwise, what's the point of a red light? Everybody can just drive through the intersection at the same time. We've seen what happens there. I had someone the other day in Minneapolis, where I'm at, drove into a restaurant patio, killed multiple people, injured multiple more. I mean, again, there's probably a reason we need to have driving tests. And I don't know anything about the story. I don't know if this person was sober, but probably a reason we have to have laws around driving laws and taking a test and understanding, and probably not being under the influence. I mean, again, I don't have the answer, but I know that that there is a challenge that occurs when we start to go unregulated or too disconnected altogether. The other thing I want to come back to is on the technology side of things. The thing that while we don't, there's plenty of problems with the control of information, or the control, and there's worries, right? You can see it. I saw a meme the other day. Actually, I might have been even this morning, where it was showing what happens if the banks and certain countries do this social system for money, right? And you've probably heard about this, Kirk, where, they may determine, well, you can only get your money if you meet certain requirements of the regime, right? You have to have certain carbon credits, or you have to, maybe you said something, you said something wrong about the government, or they thought something you said was offensive, and now you're not going to be able to get your money. I mean, extremes, but plausible. Okay. And we've seen some of this happen in other systems, but at the same time, now we've got all these other means of technology, other banks out there, it's going to be decentralized a little bit. But let's also go back to some of the problems that the technology world. Not only do they control that data, but let's go back to Facebook or Google or Wave, which is an accounting company, and and I'm not particularly looking at one or the other, because some do actually have back offices support. But try calling Google to get help on Google. I mean, you got to go to Google forums and online and the internet to find people that can give you an idea about what to do. There's no support whatsoever. Where the other day, I was trying to locate a transaction from last year that I was trying to clarify for my taxes, and I can actually call an 800 number on the back of my car, get someone who said, oh yeah, by the way, here's the information. This is what that transaction, this is where the money went. Oh, thank you, done. If I have my banking all done through a digital institution with no individual to meet, at all, other than some AI chatbot that might get me after multiple attempts to some agent sitting somewhere in some country that I can never talk to, that, has no means of actually connecting back to the system. Well, again, that would probably be another argument for why we should have, crypto. Okay, fine. But at the same time, it's also an argument as to why this push to go completely decentralized, completely to technology is also a risk too. Because I was just over at FedEx office an hour and a half ago, and I couldn't believe it. And this woman was in there, I don't know, looked like she was in her 40s, and the woman from FedEx is helping her to work the copier. And she was, actually stressed. She said multiple times, she goes, "Oh gosh, I'm just so nervous. I'm so nervous. Oh, thank you so much for your help. I've never worked a copier in my life." I mean, you would have thought she was picking up a handgun for the first time in her life, and she was afraid that it would misfire in her face. Literally, this woman was scared to death to use a copier. Thank goodness there's somebody there to actually help with working through that, because we can't just go online and read 50 pages of help. YouTube has certainly helped this a little bit. You can certainly find any video out there, but I've tried this before, and yes, I can do more myself, but sometimes it's nice to, the other day somebody said, "Oh, you know how easy it is to get your brakes done?" He showed me, because you just pull the clips here, 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 and I said, "Well, that looks fairly easy, and I'm sure there's a YouTube video." But how much is it to have someone else do it?
Right.
$300, it's worth $300. How much time do I have to invest and figure out how to do my own brakes? We're in a society where everybody thinks they want to do everything themselves. They can't stand paying other people for it. But we only have so much time, so much capacity, and so much talent that to some degree there needs to still be systems in place to help us as a society accomplish, viable solutions.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is why we have these conversations. There's always both sides to everything. I think that, a lot, it's funny because the political side, people debate all the time of what's the right approach. And what's funny is it's usually just, it's what I think people don't realize is there's usually not a disagreement about the ultimate direction. The disagreement is how to get there. And so
100%.
it's not like, oh, I want more freedom, you want less freedom. It's like, no, I don't want to live in a North Korea. Like, that would be horrible. If you've never been there, go there and you'll decide, I don't like less freedom, if that's your thing. So I don't think, it's kind of like global warming. Like, people, there's we talk about this in a live episode all the time. Like, global warming, it's like, I think it's a sham. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying the politics around it, I think, are fabricated. And the problem is, people say, well, I want a cleaner planet. Like, everyone wants a cleaner planet. There's not a single person on this world who doesn't want a cleaner planet. That's not the argument.
Maybe the people that are behind waste management.
Well, you mean the company? The company's trying to clean up too. But in all seriousness, the point is when it comes to an issue like global warming, people confuse pollution with climate change, with all these different concepts. It's like nobody thinks we should have a dirtier planet. Where people disagree is on certain aspects of the issue. Is it warming? Are we contributing to it? Is it actually a problem? Like, all these are important questions that we have to ask. I don't know what the answers are. I'm not smart enough to know the answers, but those are questions you have to ask. And you have to decide, like, if we do anything, is it going to make it worse? Like, is there actually a solution, right? There's all these questions that have to be asked. And then, but ultimately, do we want a planet that's going to be around for our kids and grandkids? Yes, everyone wants that. Like, so we all agree generally on the direction. The question is, how are we going to get there? Is the risk that is being taken worth taking, right? It's another question. And I'm not even giving my opinion. I'm just saying, like, these are just questions you have to ask. And I think the problem is most people don't even bother asking them. They just say, well, it's good because we want to save the planet. It's like, from what? Like, just get into the details and realize, like, what you're actually saying. Because if this is where we're kind of going off topic, but this is where we talk about in the show a lot, about, clean energy. Like, green, clean energy I think everyone is for that. Nobody wants dirty energy. Nobody wants a dirty planet. But my question is, if you have something like nuclear, which is clearly the winner in the race for clean energy, why are both sides against it? You might say, well, it's the oil companies. Yeah, but why is the green movement against it? They should be for it. And so I always look at these pockets and say, all right, you have an issue, you have a clear winner. Why is nobody talking about it? It's known technology. Everybody knows it exists. It's being used. And yet countries are doing away with it. Like Germany, which is relying on Russian oil and natural gas to survive, and yet they're getting rid of their nuclear. It just seems like mind-boggling. So when you think about like what's right and what's wrong, you just have to think about the whole issue and say, why is this not being discussed? Well, there's probably other issues, right? I mean, I think that once now tech has come out and said now we need nuclear because we won't have enough energy for AI. Clearly, we're going to run out of energy really quickly if we don't have nuclear. The nuclear takes 20 years to build, so we're easily going to run out of energy. It's not the solution now. It was the solution 10 years ago, but not right now. It's too late. But that's a conversation that should have been happening before. But we forego our agency of these decisions to the government to make it for us. And it's like, well, maybe people should be out there and doing the work themselves, right? To push this. And there are some people, but not enough. That's why I like the decentralization approach. It's like, it's, as Doug said, we do need a certain amount of centralization. You know, we need driver's license. We need, you know, certain rules of the road. We don't live in anarchy, right? Is the old, what's the old quip? Everyone's a libertarian until it happens to you.
Exactly.
Right. So I have libertarian tendencies. I have Democrat tendencies. I have Republican tendencies. I'm not, I don't fit in a box. And so I like ripping on everybody because I think everybody's fallible as I am. And so if you think about all of these concepts, right, the decentralization, there's a lot of benefits to it. And one of them is it allows everybody to test, right? Like if you got 100 people, if you have a plot of land, you put 100 people out there and you have no rules, let's see what they do, right? Assuming that they're not killing each other. But like, let's see what they do. Maybe somebody comes up with some innovative approach. And maybe everyone else says, hey, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. That's how we progress, is because you allow these little experiments to take hold and you allow people to do low risk experiments that people can control and say, all right, let's try this. If it works, let's try it again and again and again. And if it really works, then we'll adopt it. If it doesn't work, then you trash it and try something else. But that aspect of iteration is one of the things that makes our country great. We are one of the best countries out there with innovation. Silicon Valley is based around innovation. The whole culture there is based around innovation. And whatever we've done in our country has allowed us to be one of the most innovative countries out there, and other countries aren't replicating it. And all you can do is just look at what are we doing differently than them, and is that helping? Like property rights is really important, right? If you don't have property rights, then you don't own anything. Well, what's my incentive to do anything because I don't have any property rights? So all these different things impact. So there is a balance for sure, and it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens over in Asia because there's a lot of changes going on. Certainly with China, certainly with other countries out there. There's a lot of countries, Asian countries, that are doing like Singapore is doing some great stuff. Like people don't talk about Singapore, but that is a wonderful country with. It's probably one of the safest countries out there. People out there look out for, like, if there's a kid on the bus by themselves, like a random stranger will like look out for them. Just like making sure the kid doesn't hurt himself or do something stupid. Like that's a different culture. I've heard people go over there and they're like, it's brilliant. You just can't become a citizen because it's insanely hard, but it's a great culture. So whatever they're doing, maybe we should learn from that, right? Maybe we should figure out what they're doing and say, hey, maybe we should try this here. That's why I like the decentralization approach, because iteration, because you get to see examples of what works, what doesn't, and we could try it and just say, hey, it worked there, maybe it works here, or maybe it doesn't. Free healthcare, it doesn't work. Eventually, somebody's got to pay the bill, and Europe's feeling that now, and eventually, we're going to feel it. We are feeling it, but we're going to feel it more. All of these concepts, you can see, yeah, they work great until they don't, and then you got to try something else. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up in the interest of time here. Doug, where can people find more about you?
Thanks, Kirk. You can find more information about me if you're a family that has a child, planning to have a child, and might be thinking about the cost of college education and what that's going to do to your future financial solvency. It's expensive. It's stressful. It's a lot you need to know, a lot of work that the kids have to do, a lot of work that the parents need to do. And of course, there's a lot of money, and it has absolutely been one of the highest in inflation of any expenses for any family, especially if you've got a child right now that's entering or in high school. It's not too late to start, but it is absolutely never too, it's absolutely can be too late if you're getting closer to senior year. So start earlier, check out some information, and give us a call if you want to solve this solution and make sure that your retirement and college problem are integrated, and that you have a successful child education and financial future. You can reach us at mergentcollegeadvisors.com, and that is Mergent, MERGENT, mergentcollegeadvisors.com.
Awesome. Well, Doug, I appreciate you joining us on the show.
That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.